Happy Draw Steel Day! It's the day we've been waiting for 2.5 years. Or maybe only a year and a half if you've only been keeping up since the Backer Kit campaign at the end of 2023. But it's here! The PDF, you can get it right now. Books are coming down the line. Or maybe you're watching this in the future. Hello, I hope they still have sandwiches. If you haven't been keeping up with Draw Steel developments, and you're not exactly sure where to start, well, that's what this video is for. If you haven't ever really learned a new RPG before, well, that's what this video is for. This video is split up into two parts. The first part is a where should I get started sort of thing. I'm going to walk you through the things that I think you should do first. That's the first part of this video. The second part, I'm going to be going over some guidance on how the rules work and how the flow of Draw Steel goes and how it compares to some other games that I've played. Well, let's just dive right in. I'm sure you want to get to the PDF right away, so let's do it. All right, you've opened Draw Steel for the first time. Your inclination, start reading right away. I think that's a mistake. I think the first thing you should do, flip through the book. Don't look at any of the text, just look at the art. One of the things that MCDM is best at is art. Every single book they've ever made has absolutely brilliant art, cover to cover. So flip through the book. Get excited, get inspired, find a piece that really speaks to you. Now, I could show some of my favorite pieces, but I'm not going to, because I want you to explore it for yourself. I don't want my judgments to color your first impressions. Once you've done that, I suggest that you read the first couple pages that talk about what Draw Steel is. It gives you a good idea of what they're shooting for. This is not a game that's going to fit every situation. Next, read the basics. Read it. Read the glossary. You don't need to understand all of the rules right now. In fact, you're not even going to understand all of the rules during your first session, or your first 2, or 3. Nobody expects you to have rules mastery the first time you play. If you read the glossary and you read the basics chapter, and you read it now, those terms, even if you don't fully comprehend them, if you don't fully understand them, they're going to be bouncing around in your head, and it's going to make a lot more sense when we get to making a character, which is what we're going to do next. I always like to start a new game system with making a character. If I can make a cool character right away, I don't care what else happens. I'm going to enjoy playing the game at least once. So I'm going to follow this video up, and in fact, it should be out now. I'm going to follow it up with a video where I go through this exact process. Now, of course, I've played the game before. I've made a dozen characters, so I'm not exactly new to it, but I'm going to go through this process step by step. So if you want to follow along with me and make a character with me, there's going to be a link in the description below for that video. Here's the thing. I do not recommend that you come into a new system with a character in mind. Especially in Draw Steel, I recommend that you go through and you discover your character as you go through the process of making it. The process of discovering your first character is particularly enjoyable in Draw Steel. I still like to go through and just pick options and see what I end up with. The story that I develop is often richer than anything I've ever come up with in another game system for my first character. Now here's a little trick that I like to use when making a character. Open up 2 copies of the PDF. You can have one where you're tracking what you're actively doing, you're reading through your specific section. Then you can have a second PDF open that shows, something else if you need to look up, let's say a different option, or you need to look up a rule because you're not exactly sure how it works. The last piece of advice I recommend before starting your first character, do it by hand. Do it by hand. There are community-made tools that are absolutely wonderful, and I use them most of the time when I'm making a character myself. In particular, I recommend Forge Steel, and I recommend Stall. Now, if you're watching this on or very close to release day, it's very likely that those tools are not up to date as of yet. They're still likely working off of an old version, so things are going to be a little different. I don't recommend using them right away, but they're going to get updated as soon as the developers possibly can. The reason I recommend doing it by hand is just because it's a much more tactile experience. I find that I tend to connect better and learn better from a system when I'm actively having to write things down. Your mileage may vary. Next piece of advice, as you're looking through and making your character, you can absolutely look up rules as you come across them, but I tend to recommend just writing down the things you're not exactly sure about. And then you can go back and look at them later once you've got your character fully built. It's going to help you with context. Context is king. The last thing I recommend when making a character is have fun with the complications section. The complications in Draw Steel are absolutely wonderful. They're just fun. They're really great story hooks, too. As a director, I like pulling on my player characters' backgrounds and their complications to flesh out the story. Read the ancestry fiction. The ancestry fiction is one of my favorite parts of Draw Steel. Most of the RPGs that I've read before has encyclopedic type entries. They tell you about what these ancestries are, and they don't tell you about who they are. Draw Steel takes a different approach, and it's one that I thoroughly enjoy. We're not learning everything about these ancestries. There's way too much to understand in terms of culture. You get to learn important details and important little things about them in a short piece of fiction, and the fiction is really good. So especially for your chosen ancestry, read their whole fiction section. Okay, so like I said, I've got a video linked below with me making a character in this exact process. Now, when it comes to character sheets, there is a default character sheet. I'm not going to use it for my first time. Filling out the character sheet is something that can be done later. So when I go through the process, I just like to write down which options I'm choosing and if there's any important details about it. Okay, that's the first half of this video done. Second half, we're going to take a look at some of the rules that give people trouble. We're going to take a look at the core gameplay loop and talk a little bit about director advice. So how does draw steel combat work? What's the gameplay loop? What makes it different than other games? At the start of each adventuring period, your first combat, you're going to start with none of what we call a heroic resource. Your heroic resource differs by class. So the tactician has focus. The shadow has insight. The talent has clarity. As combat continues, you're going to gain more and more of your heroic resource. You get a certain amount at the start of each turn, and there are things that can happen in combat that will grant you more. For example, the tactician gets extra focus when another ally uses a heroic ability. So as combat goes on, you're going to get more and more of your heroic resource. You can then spend that heroic resource to activate your heroic abilities. At first level, you have a 3 cost heroic ability and a 5 cost heroic ability. At the end of a combat, you lose all of your remaining heroic resources, and you gain a certain number of victories. That number of victories is decided by the difficulty of the combat encounter. A fairly standard encounter will gain you 1 victory. A difficult one, a particularly difficult one, will gain you 2. You can also gain victories outside of combat. Completion of a montage test or negotiation, or a clever way to avoid what would have been a combat encounter, are all ways that you can gain victories. These are rewarded by the director, which is what Draw Steel calls their game master. When you start your next encounter, you start with a number of heroic resources equal to your number of victories. And you still get the number of heroic resources that you would at the start of your turn otherwise. So let's say your first combat encounter, you gain 2 victories. Well, you start the next encounter with 2 of your heroic resource. So as the adventuring period goes on and your number of victories grows, you start with more and more and more of your heroic resource. Draw Steel is not entirely a game of attrition. Now I say entirely because as you take damage, your stamina value is going to decrease. You gain that back by spending recoveries. Your recoveries are a finite resource. At some point, you are going to run out, and then you're not going to be able to heal. What this means is, your hero can only take so much of a beating before they have to take a rest. What is a rest in Draw Steel? Unlike D20 Fantasy, it's not sleeping overnight. That's not enough to recuperate. In Draw Steel, you have to go back somewhere safe and take a respite. Now, a respite is a period of 24 hours or more in a single safe location. Think of it like the scene in Avengers Age of Ultron. The Avengers head to the Barton farm to recuperate after getting their butts kicked by Ultron. That's a respite. That is exactly what a respite is. The hero's going somewhere safe, recuperating, and so on. At the end of a respite, all of your victories are converted into experience. Your next combat encounter, you start with 0 victories. The whole cycle starts over again. You build heroic resources, you gain new victories, you start the next combat encounter with more heroic resources. But the nice thing is, you're still getting something out of it. You're getting experience. When you hit a certain level of experience, you level up at the end of that respite. That's the core Draw Steel gameplay loop. It's not really a game of attrition. In combat itself, you're gaining more and more of the thing that you can do that makes you a hero. Yes, you are losing recoveries, but that just drives tension. You're going to have that choice. Do we push on? We've got so many victories. Or do we pull back because someone's probably going to die? It's a tough choice. And in those moments in the game that I've run, every single time there's been a debate about whether to push on or not, it has been dramatic. At the start of combat, one player will roll for the party's initiative. They roll a d10. If it's a 6 or higher, the heroes go first. If it's lower than that, the monsters go first. When it's the hero's turn, the players choose who they want to go first. Usually this should go to the person who's got the best plan of attack, based on the current map, the current situation, so on and so forth. Now obviously, you can end up in a situation where multiple people think that they've got the best plan. Draw Steel is a game that encourages teamwork. This, more than anything, makes it stand out to me in comparison to D20 Fantasy. Here's a piece of advice from something that I did in my game. My players are absolutely fantastic, and they've been playing with me and each other for so long that they're pretty good at talking about plans. But the trick is, sometimes people have really good plans and they butt heads, and the discussion can last a while. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it does slow down combat a little. What I did was come up with a system where my players rank the quality of their plan at the start of every hero turn. Because I play in a virtual tabletop, I have them put a number in chat. If they put in a 3, that means they've got a strong plan. If they put in a 2, they've got a good plan, but maybe it doesn't matter that they go right now. If they've got a 1, they've got basically no plan at all, or it doesn't matter at all. At that point, the 3s discuss. And if somebody else comes up with a plan in that process, fine. This is just a way to kind of keep the noise level down in these conversations. If not everybody has a plan, not everybody has to speak. Let's talk action economy. On your character's turn in Draw Steel, there are 3 things they can do. They've got a main action, they've got a maneuver, and they've got a move action. The main action is going to be your bread and butter. Most of your signature attacks, your signature abilities, your heroic abilities are going to use your main action. Some of them might use a maneuver, but every character has a maneuver, a custom maneuver, that's chosen by their subclass, class and or subclass. But then there are also default maneuvers that you can use. There's always something you can do with a maneuver. Some of the defaults include a knockback maneuver. Absolutely fantastic. It's fun shoving people off cliffs. But you can also use a maneuver to catch your breath and spend a recovery. For your move action, most of the time you're going to use it to spend your default movement. Every character starts with a minimum of a 5 movement speed, but there are ways to get that up to, I think in my game I've seen a player with a 9. You can also spend your move action to disengage. Characters will have a disengage value. This shows how far you can move on a turn where you're trying to not evoke attacks of opportunity. You can also charge, movement in a straight line that ends in a free strike. Outside of those 3 things, there are also triggered actions. These can happen on or off of your turn. Your triggered action resets at the start of the round, not at the start of your turn. There's a few different reasons for this, which we don't need to get into, but that's an important distinction. Let's talk potencies. Potencies are one of the things that tends to trip up new players a lot. You can think of it a lot like a saving throw in D20 Fantasy. It's a way to bring your characteristics and the enemy's characteristics into the fight. So if you've got a character with a strong might, they should be able to resist certain effects better than a character with a weak might. This is what potencies do. They're really easy to calculate. You only have to update them once per echelon. So when you go from level 3 to 4, level 6 to 7, and level 9 to 10. When you do that, it's going to filter through all of your character sheet. There are 3 types of potencies: weak, average, and strong. Your strong potency is equal to your highest characteristic. Your average, subtract 1. It's a 1. Your weak, subtract another. It's a 0. When your highest characteristic goes up, so do your potencies. Just add 1 to all of them. That's it. That's all it does. Now let's look at an example in play. This is the Null's pressure points. As you can see, on a tier 1 on the power roll, it's A less than weak, which means you're targeting the enemy's agility, and if their agility is less than your weak value, they take the effect. If it's a tier 3, if their agility is less than your strong value, it takes effect. You're still going to do the damage regardless. The last thing I want to talk about are a couple of pieces of director advice. The first thing, choose your maps wisely. When I played D&D, I tended to choose maps that were big, had a lot of scope and scale, and that was okay. Wide open spaces didn't mean too much. In Draw Steel, you're going to want smaller maps. I recommend no bigger than about 30 by 40 as far as the grid size is concerned. The second thing, don't have extremely tight spaces. There's a lot of movement in Draw Steel, so it's important that you give enough space for this to happen. Have lots of walls and objects. You want things for your players to interact with. You want things for them to force move enemies into. You want things for your enemies to force move them into. It's going to make for very dynamic encounters in Draw Steel. Next piece of advice, play around with encounter objectives. Not every fight should be kill all the enemies. In fact, I recommend not many fights have that as your encounter objective. Look through the list. There's a lot of really entertaining things. And they give advice on how to adjust your encounter difficulty for that particular objective. Last piece of advice, don't be afraid to call cut. Alright everybody, that is all I've got for you today. I hope this has been enough to get you started on your Draw Steel journey. I only make videos when I've got a strong idea. That being said, if there's something you want to see more of or something you want to learn about from the Draw Steel ecosystem, leave a comment below. And if it's something that I've got a strong idea on how to communicate, I'll make a video. I hope you all enjoy Draw Steel. I know it's taken over a place in my heart as my favorite game to run and to play. I'm really excited about where Draw Steel is going, from the upcoming products that we've already heard about to the things that have only been whispered of. From the Summoner and the Beast Hearts to Crack the Sun. These are the things that I'm excited for, and I hope you'll stick along for the ride. Again, leave questions below, and in the meantime, keep rolling.